Good morning. My name is Jason Inay. I'm an Inayan Eskrima, and welcome to the fourth episode to the Eskrima podcast. And getting ready to go to work right now, so it's time to talk to you guys a little bit about what happened last night. So we have our normal class on Tuesday nights. I did some stretching because that's part of my training for myself to keep and maintain my ability to continue to train and teach. Taught a private lesson. We worked on Filipino boxing, some Jeet Kune Do, to keep my skills fresh for when I go to the Inayan Instructor Association training and do all those things too. It's also part of the Spider Dubok system, so we're just keeping that stuff fresh for our students that are in that program. And then I had an Eskrima class. It was a pretty good class. There was quite a bit of people there. I posted a couple things on like YouTube and Instagram and things like that. We started the class with Siniwali. Shortly within the class, there's a silver alert, right? So all of our phones go off. And so I will, tell everybody to turn off their phones if they need to, so that way we can continue to train. And like all my instructors pretty much were like, I'm here, because they're all pretty much gray-haired. And reminded me of something that I tell people when they ask me, like, how do I select a good teacher, right? And so I have some criteria there. The first thing is that if your instructor doesn't have a relationship with their own teacher or teachers, or has a teacher, that could be a warning flag. By itself, it's not a warning flag. My first teacher, my most influential teacher is my father, and he's been gone for 23 years now almost. We're coming up on the 2023 memorial workout. It's the 23rd. It's been 23 years since he's been gone. And we started this particular tradition in memory of him, so that way we could all gather together and share stories. Have some of the senior instructors teach most of the time if they're available, and we've been having that for 23 years. So that's the first thing, right? The next thing is by itself, that particular thing, not having a relationship with your original instructor or instructors could be a problem. Right. The next one is have students that are older than you. If you don't have students that are older than you, or that instructor doesn't have students older than them, by itself not a problem, but could be a problem if it's present with a lot of the other warning signs. Another one would be that you have a relationship with, or that instructor has a relationship with their peers and seniors, people that were maybe not necessarily their instructor, maybe assisted in teaching them before, or just senior to them as students. By itself, not a warning, but if we have it together, that'd be a problem. That instructor should have very senior students that would have been with them at least 5, 10, 15 or more years, right? By itself, again, not a problem, but together could be. Have students that are near their age, same age, close to their age. By itself, again, not a problem, but together, a problem. Right? Have students that are younger than them, right? If they don't have students that are younger than them, could be a problem. But some instructors, they only teach adults, and some instructors, they only teach children, or for the most part. But they'll have staff and have different things, so could be a problem. So if you have an instructor that doesn't have youth students, doesn't have students that are not only adult students, but adult students that are close to their age or older than them, doesn't have any senior students, so in most schools, like a black belt will be like 4 or 5 years in. So I'm talking about a senior student like at least 5 years, but really we're talking about 10, 15 years plus, especially if they've been teaching that long, right? So, we look at different instructors. Our silver alert, right, is someone ideal who has a relationship with their original instructors, and they participate in things with them, right? And or new instructors, because maybe their instructor is gone, right? And has a relationship or teaches and works with people of their own peer group, senior to them, possibly, right? And also has students that are older than them, as well as has, all of these things together. That's a pretty good instructor. They must have something to offer, because they can work with children, work with people of their own age, have senior students, so they have something to offer them, have a relationship with an elder peer group, right? And then also have a relationship with an instructor above them. So they have a willingness to learn more and continue to work under some sense of humility, because it takes a lot of humility to learn from someone, especially as you get more advanced, right? So yeah, I was reminded by that last night, because I'm sitting there. It's my Uncle Frank. He's the first one that says silver alert, or like I'm here. Everybody's laughing. And he was my student when I was I was his student under my father. We were both students, of course, but he was an instructor under my father when I was just a little boy, and he's responsible for a lot of my growth. And then I have, a number of my instructors that have been with me for 20 plus years. They're all 4th and 5th degree black belts, equivalency, right, or higher. Some of them, specifically Lauren, who's a guru under us, he's been with us about 19, 20 years. He's a maestro in capoeira and holds rank in Wing Chun and Taekwondo and things like that. So yeah, he's an experienced martial artist. And and then I'm looking at a number of my students. They're all about my age, the adult ones. One of them is older than I was around when I was a kid and learning under my Uncle Jimmy, who was my teacher when I was 9. And he's there working out, trying to get better. And and then I have a bunch of youth students and new students that have only been training for like 3 lessons, 4 lessons, something like that. And I'm so, lucky. And I've been in schools where that's not the case, but the instructor's still good, because, they have youth students and they have senior students, and, they have people of their age, but maybe they don't have a relationship with their instructor because they're gone, and because they're invested in their school, they don't necessarily have another teacher. I have not met a teacher that I would recommend or that I would work with that has all those red flags, because usually my experience is when I try to, that invariably there's a problem. So something to think about. You could call it your silver alert, but it was just an interesting little reminder, as we were working through our Siniwali last night. We really worked on 4-count. That's for the most part what we did. We did 4-count Siniwali, and we did it with empty hand versus knife. We did it stick versus stick, double stick versus double stick, right? We did double stick versus hand. We showed the hands translations for more of like a self-defense. We talked about range. Siniwali is such a great martial art or style within the Inayan System of Eskrima. It's really its own standalone style if you understand it deeply enough. There's easily years and years and years of curriculum. In the Inayan training organization, we really only work on the fundamentals through that organization. My organization was my dad's organization, of course. We only work through the fundamentals for the most part. It's only in recent years, not actually. It's only in the later years of my father's life, and then into my stewardship of the Inayan training organization and the Inayan System of Eskrima, that we have moved on to more of it as a full-fledged martial arts style. That's because my dad, and I actually was talking about that in the class, that the style versus style curriculum is meant for our advanced students, and that my father was using Siniwali as a complete style to defeat Serrada, which is one of the favorite styles of all of my dad's students, including myself. I do very much enjoy utilizing, teaching, and have a lot of pride in the Inayan Serrada Eskrima style. But my dad was showing how to use Siniwali to beat those styles. He was trying to state that, each of the styles within the Inayan System of Eskrima is a whole and complete solution, and that the system in and of itself is complete if you use it correctly to defeat any style, especially in preparation to defeat a style, an opponent that is not necessarily trained in Filipino martial arts, let alone the Inayan System of Eskrima. Because the reality is that if you're using martial arts for self-defense or for combat, you're not going to encounter an opponent that is trained like you. They'll be trained differently because they're an opponent. And so Siniwali was his main style that he was using in the late 90s as an example style I think for two reasons. One was because a lot of his senior students didn't really like doing anything but Serrada, Cadena de Mano, and Larga Mano. They were pretty much ignoring the Dequerdas, the Siniwali, and they didn't really understand the Espada y Daga. They just thought it was Serrada with a sword and a dagger, that's just Serrada with a sword and a dagger. It's not Espada y Daga, not at least within the style definition within the Inayan System of Eskrima that my father designated or mandated, right? So he's using Siniwali to defeat Serrada, and we explained that a little bit in class and showed how, as an example, how empty hand could be utilized against double stick. I don't recommend it unless you're very, very good, but it is possible, right? The thing is about the system, the Inayan System of Eskrima, is like any other system. If it's meant to be complete, it doesn't have to be complete in the way that you have grappling, like an MMA thing. Like you have to have kicking, you have to have punching, you have to have grappling, and you have to have submissions, and you have to have counter grappling and defense against those things in order to be a complete martial art. And that's one way of thinking about it. But the thing is that you also could be good at one style, say boxing as an example, right? We were recently seeing this in some of the MMA fights where the stance is taken that boxing is enough. And to a degree it is. If you're so good at that, you've truly mastered it, you understand range and distance and angles, that you should be able to accommodate other kinds of opponents. What makes it hard for that to be evident in a sporting match is the rules. You can't punch the person in the back of the head, you can't punch them in the groin, right? You're wearing gloves, they're wearing gloves, right? So there's a differentiation there. The fight is scheduled, you've been training for it, there's a referee, there's all these other things that mitigate danger, which is important, but also they hamper a style when you're at a point of advantage, right? And we try to illustrate this through each of the styles within the Inayan System of Eskrima in order for our advanced students and our gurus to get a full understanding of each individual style. As Suro, which is the head of the system of the Inayan System of Eskrima, it's the only martial arts system my father had founded, right? It's my responsibility to nurture all the styles within each of the practitioners so that they can find what works for them, not what I prefer or what I think works best, right? But what would work for each individual situation and each individual person in each individual situation. I often say to my students now that, the whole system is a one-size-fits-all system of teaching and of training and of practicing. It's not a fighting system per se. Sure, you're going to learn how to fight, but that fighting methodology that you need to work on is going to be wholly your own, right? So you're making that art your own. So we have to, through time and effort and energy, you have to do all that work, put in the time. We tailor fit it to your body and to your proclivity, right? So if you have long arms, you might prefer long strategies, long distance strategies. If, say, you're more inclined to moving just straight forward, then we have to look at the techniques within each of the styles in the system and how they leverage that, as well as use the other techniques and methods to exploit and expose your weaknesses so that way you can prepare for them, right? Siniwali is just one approach. It's the one that we use to teach in the beginning for coordination and focus and timing and rhythm and concentration and all those things which Siniwali is really good for. You know, my dad used to say that Siniwali is the easiest style to teach, but it's the most difficult style to use. So we find that to be true as we try it with sparring. One of the only times I ever got my hand broken in full contact sparring was in Wisconsin. I think it was Gary Farron. Great guy. Now a guru now. But we were fighting double stick and he broke my left hand. And I remember, trying to use Siniwali, and I did it well enough, but not enough to not get my hand broken. And my arm didn't want to work as soon as my hand was broken. And I had to fight one stick versus two stick for a while, but it kept on going. Because these are, these fights that we do are not, winner or loser. They're more exploration, experimentation, and also just for experience, right? So that way we can come back to class teaching our students with real experiences as opposed to some kind of hypothesis that's set up in a void and we're supposed to take as gospel, right? Try it out. Let's fight. And so I remember having to fight one-handed for a moment. Luckily it was my right hand that was whole, and it wasn't until I was able to lift my left hand that I was able to continue to go. We were wearing gloves. I was wearing lacrosse gloves, and I hadn't opened my hand yet. So I knew something was wrong with my hand because my arm basically shut off for a moment. Kept on fighting. Buzzer goes off. Take the glove off. Open my hand and balloons up, swells. Can't move it anymore. It hurts so much. Hurts a lot. It taught me two things. I need to work on my Siniwali. And the other thing is, it's not true that if you break my hand that, I'm not going to be able to use that hand. I might not be able to use it right away, but I may still be able to use it. I wasn't able to use it with great effect, but it wasn't what, the truth is. I'll just break your hand and then, that you won't be able to use that hand and you'll be done with that hand. And I was able to fend it off for a little bit. I used my footwork, right? We talked about that yesterday, in order to continue to fight and defend myself until I could bring the hand into play, right? And that goes into, that particular experience goes into the way that I teach Siniwali, but not only that, but also the way that we calculate and teach tactics for actual combat or fighting, because we have to calculate an opponent that may be injured but can continue to fight, so they're still a threat. And how do we deal with that? How do we circumvent that? So, that's part of my journey to becoming an instructor, a senior instructor, and then bringing that information to everyone in the United Training Organization and the way that we practice and we train and we approach combat. And that's just Siniwali. And I love that style. It requires a lot of concentration and focus, builds a lot of skill, right? Skill is an element of a martial artist. It's one of the elements that no one can give you. You have to get yourself through work, right? An instructor gives you knowledge, right? Maybe credibility and lineage, but you have to put the work in for skill, and it requires your synergy. Then there's others like attributes, like strength. You give that to yourself, right? Through your hard work at the gym or at home or wherever you do your training, right? But moving forward, Siniwali was what we worked on. It was a lot of fun. It's interesting, one of our students, Todd, who's been around for a long time, used to be a student of my Uncle Jimmy's. He was like, great class and everything else. I love that. And I made the comment to him, there's a lot in each of the things that we do that we can spend a lot of time on in class to the exclusion of all others and really dig deep. It's like what I mentioned in one of the earlier podcasts that we just started here. In Las Vegas, I taught some things about the formal feats in Serrada that are readily apparent if you can see them, right? But if you just look at it as like this is a formality and ceremony or pomp of the Serrada system, and how we feed angles so that we can attack. And you just look at the cover of the book, yeah, you know what the title of the book is. You might even know who the author is. But you don't know what the content of that book is because you've never opened it up, you've never explored, you never referred back to, you never highlighted, you never underlined, you've never thought about it. You just passed on, right? It's the same thing with the cross block or the shoulder counter or the first hand drill that we teach in Kadena Mano. Right? So you have to dig deep. And we moved on towards the end of the day last night, or the end of the class last night with Kadena Mano, our empty hand style, but we specifically moved towards joint locking. And, you know, the students are all working on their different locks or their lock flows. And I mentioned something to one of the newer students, and she's like 14. And I look at her and I go, you know, we're not intending to take the person down with the lock. You're getting the grip and getting it in the position that you want so that you can violently crank on that joint lock. It's not for a takedown. We're going to practice the takedown. That tells us what the technique is like and whether you have it mechanically correct. However, that's not what we're doing, right? What we're going to do is we're going to violently crank on that lock in order to dislocate the arm, as an example. And I go on to a colorful explanation that I'm going to tear it off and beat you with a wet end. She gets her eyes all big. I'm like, just kidding, but you know, you're trying to do something very specific when you utilize this, that it's not for a takedown or a submission. And so, you know, I've often told this over the years, and I've heard my teachers, my dad and my Uncle Danny. My Uncle Danny uses the term ballistic joint lock or something to that effect, right? But we use it differently. Our locking is differently purposed than, say, other joint locking arts that are equally effective and viable. Well, their purpose as much as to break something is to take someone down. I don't really care if the person falls, right? As an Eskrima, I want to create an advantage. You with a dangling arm is a great advantage for me, right? So, you know, joint locking is a big part. You know, people ask me, what's the difference between Inayan Kadena Mano and what was taught by great grandmaster Max Sarmiento. Max was a great empty hand teacher to my father, you know, an uncle to my father in many ways. And in fact, my father grew up calling him Uncle Max. Didn't know he was an Eskrima master until my aunt Eileen, who's the sister of my mother, had said, hey, you know, you're looking for martial arts. This is before my dad had even started doing Eskrima. Why don't you talk to Uncle Max? He does Filipino Martial Arts, Eskrima, or something to that effect. My dad didn't even know at the time, and he's in his early 20s when this happens. Anyways, so the difference really between Sarmiento Kadena Mano and Inayan Kadena Mano obviously is my father, but more importantly is Greek Grandmaster Angel Kabbalas, whose empty hand techniques are part of Inayan Kadena Mano, the joint locking and things especially, right? That's the same question that could be asked, you know, what's the difference between Kabbalas Serrada and Inayan Serrada? And the answer has to be Manong Angel Max, right? Or excuse me, Manong Max, right? Because Manong Angel has in his documentation for the Kabbalas Serrada style co-founder Max Sarmiento. And my father learned privately from both of them for a number of years before he began to teach, and his Kadena Mano, my Kadena Mano for that matter, you know, over those years of personal instruction that my father had, and then I had from my father and his students, like my Uncle Frank, right, is different because of Manong Angel, right? So that difference is there, and the difference between the Serrada from my family and the Serrada that my dad learned is Manong Max and his way of teaching. Max's way of doing short stick essentially was at the time that my dad was learning from Manong Angel, the stick was exclusively measured from armpit to center of palm, approximately 24 inches in most people, sometimes longer. I typically use a 26-inch stick myself, right? Max's stick was shorter. It was approximately an 18-inch stick, ironically, for those who are in the know, right? But his system was a 5-strike system, and it was more direct. So there was less of the checking and hitting that we see indicative of a Serrada, which is reminiscent of other trapping styles, which is why my Uncle Danny says that Dequerdas, Ballistic, and Serrada are related, at least in function, if not directly related from lineage of people, right? So yeah, that was yesterday. It was great training. Had great fellowship. We announced the Mangisusuro Memorial for 2023, and then we also talked about new shirts that we're going to get for class and a number of other things. So, you know, when you're looking for a teacher, look for a good teacher. You know, dig deep into the things that maybe you don't want to do. For example, for us, it's Siniwali for some students because they want to move on to Serrada and Kadina Namano is so obviously useful right away. And you understand, like the last thing that I told, or not the last thing, but the last thing I'm going to tell you guys is the hand informs the stick, and the stick informs the knife, and the knife informs the double stick, and the double stick informs the axe and shield, and the axe and shield informs the sword and the dagger. That all of the styles and all of the weapon combinations are part of a continuum within Eskrima, especially the Inayan system of Eskrima. We'll see you on the training mat. You guys have a great day.